Welcome to Lawyers Coach. Lawyers Coach is a series of podcasts that aims to find out what makes lawyers tick. Each episode features myself, Claire Rayson, and Oliver Hansard, both former lawyers and now coaches, interviewing a range of legal leaders to find out what success means and looks like in law. Lawyers Coach challenges lawyers to think differently and be inspired by their colleagues and peers. In this episode, Oliver Hansard speaks to Natalie Salunke. Natalie is Head of Legal at RVU. She is also a committee member of O-Shaped Lawyer. She speaks to Oliver about adding value as an in-house counsel, about bringing your strengths to the table, and how being a lawyer is not just about the technical, but also about mindset and soft skills. But of course, she starts by telling Oliver why it was that she chose law in the first place.
So it's funny, isn't it? Because I think the more you interview in-house or commercial lawyers, the more you realise how far they've forayed from their initial, idea of what law was. So I think for me, it was definitely about sort of being a justice in the world and actually being there to help, right the wrongs of the world, which I think is probably naive, but I think there's definitely an element of that still lives true despite me having this kind of city training contract and becoming a corporate commercial lawyer. So it was definitely all about just wanting to give a voice to what's wrong and right those wrongs.
So how did you go about that? Where did you first get the idea of studying law?
Is it sad that I guess would have started to apply to university around the same time that Ally McBeal was massive on TV?
One of many.
I'd like to think that it wasn't the unisex toilets and breaking out into dances. I think the way that lawyers kind of carry themselves, they seem to have this view of the world that other people don't. And I think I was quite sort of interested in knowing a little bit more about what it was like to have a lawyer lens of the world and, see risk and see opportunities sort of, for justice in places that, you wouldn't necessarily as kind of just a normal person.
And so you studied law at university?
I did. So I studied English law and French law at Kent. So that had a year abroad studying French law at the University of Bordeaux.
And did you enjoy the study of law, both in France and in England?
At first, I remember thinking, is this ever going to click? And I think the good news is it did. But I mean, did I enjoy studying it? I think probably the first couple of years, not so much. And I think in my final year, which would have been my fourth year, I just relaxed a bit more and just thought, I don't want it to just be a ticking the box learning process. I actually want to, in my essays and in my exams, kind of explore things a little bit more. I think I've never been very good at kind of tick box learning. And I think law degrees to some extent have to cover a certain, curricula to get you to that kind of basic standard to be able to kind of be let out into the world. But whether or not actually doing a degree in law actually gives you any ability to practice law, I think they're two very different things.
So you weren't put off enough, shall we say, by studying the law. Then you went on to the LPC and then into your first job. Talk to me about those leaps from the academic study into actually practicing law.
To me, I think a career in law, if you kind of want to be the sort of city lawyer, I think one of the best places to do that is London. And so there was never any kind of question about me coming to London. I think I wanted to do my LPC there for a year first to get to know the city, because I'd never really spent much time in London, so that when I started my training contract I'd feel a little bit more familiar, as it were. And then while I was at Taylor Wessing, I was there for my training contract. I think I started 2007 and qualified 2009, so that would have been when we had one of our lovely recessions on the back of all of the toxic, I think, subprime mortgages that were being sold at the time. Weirdly enough, during my training contract, I did quite a corporate heavy training contract, private equity, public institutions and markets, but one of the seats that I did was in banking. And rather than doing sort of mainly loan kind of agreements and facilities and that sort of thing, I actually spent the majority of my time on mortgage portfolio sales, which literally are the documentation that's required to package up a lot of these assets, which we were, very much talking about at the time, and ultimately led to a big recession in the world. So my final seat was in trademark, so that was quite fun. But ultimately, it was kind of very apparent by the end of my training contract that having done such a corporate heavy training contract and there being literally no jobs in the city, I think there were kind of trainee swaps between firms, but there was nothing on the open market other than one job at Red Law in intellectual property. I think that was literally it. It was a bit worrying, really, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. And I wasn't.
But still determined to stay in the law at that point?
It was a difficult time, and I wasn't really sure what there was that was going to be out there in the type of law that I wanted to do. So I actually did entertain a change of career to become an insurance underwriter. I actually did get down to the last kind of 4 for Brit Insurance and Chaucer. But I guess luckily for my legal career, I stumbled across a couple of jobs that were in-house. I think one was at FTSE and the other was at Travelex. And so the Travelex role was a 3-month sort of temporary contract. And I just kind of took a chance on it and thought, if I can get this, I would love the opportunity to work in that environment.
And how did you find that transition from the law firm into business? Did you feel like you were adequately trained as a lawyer to practice as a lawyer in a business?
I think the answer is no. And I think when you haven't been kept on by a company or you've been let go by a company, if we look at it that way, it really does knock your confidence. And I don't think you should underestimate that. And I think, we need to talk about it a bit more because it's happening to a lot of people in
particularly
COVID
at the moment. Yeah.
So I guess going into my role as an NQ, I was so worried that I didn't have anything to add or bring to the table that I thought, well, you know what? I need to justify why I'm here. And I need to show that I can actually add value. And if I can add value, hopefully then the business will find me valuable. And, the fact that I'm kind of picking up the law as I go along and I'm kind of trying to kind of, learn on the job almost, is, something that kind of started to drive me and drove my development and my career ultimately, because I think, taking even the most simplest tasks, I did kind of dissect them to the most basic level. I remember one of the things, it kind of, it shows what sort of a geek I was then. I remember saying to myself, okay, so most people leave at 5:30. If I do an extra 2 hours work every day, I'm going to propel my growth such that, I'll be so many more kind of months qualified than I would be if I just did my kind of 9 to 5. And that's how kind of worried I was. But I think it ultimately did pay off, because I think it taught me a really good methodology, I guess, for dissecting or, taking apart problems and really trying to provide solutions in a way that was backed by knowledge.
So are you able to recall the difference in the style of working in-house versus private practice?
I think being in private practice, I didn't find particularly empowering. I almost felt it was the opposite, because I think there is a certain structure in which you have to fit in. And I remember a comment from one of the associates that I was working with when I was a trainee, who just, who didn't really like me because they basically thought I was a little bit too big for my boots. And I think it's funny because you're being trained up as a law student, you see all these people behaving a certain way, you think that you get almost overtrained for something, and you think that you're going to be able to bring all your great ideas and all this intelligence that you've accumulated and that you are to the table. And ultimately all you're doing is paginating a bundle, or all you're doing is changing 2 lines in a standard template. And I think it's quite disappointing as a law student and then a lawyer, because you've got all this stuff you want to kind of give, but you can't always give it. So I think actually in the in-house environment, I think there's more scope to actually bring all the value you can bring to the table, because like anybody else who's there in the business, you're here to kind of make this commercial enterprise work. And so whether it's your legal brain or just you having some sort of common sense or something to bring to the table, actually is something, and is actually enough. And I think in private practice, there was always that pressure that you are a lawyer, you do lawyer stuff. Whereas I think in-house, it's like, yes, you are a lawyer, but you're actually part of an ecosystem that's trying to create something that's got nothing to do with law. So you may bring your spectacles, your legal spectacles with you, and you're looking at the world with your risk kind of legal view, but you're there to kind of support the enterprise and doing what it needs to do. And somebody you're speaking to in the business doesn't know if you're speaking as a lawyer or speaking with common sense or speaking as you're just you.
I think the inference of what you're saying is the private practice way of delivering legal services is underutilizing the skills and talents of the fantastically bright people that are coming through the system.
Completely. And I think it's so that's the disappointment of law almost, is that it should be so many things to so many people. It's a shame that we've got all these really smart people in these like amazing offices that don't feel they can bring their whole selves to work. And I think this is what kind of gets me going is even in some companies where you're in-house, you won't be able to do that because it really depends on corporate culture.
So you're finding your feet at Travelex and move to vendor, where you get your first leadership role in a legal function.
Yeah.
How was that? How was taking on the extra responsibility of leadership for you?
It was funny. It was absolutely petrifying because I was only 2.5 years qualified at the time. And actually back then, I think it's more common now, you're seeing more startups take on more junior lawyers, which is, great for them because it's a great experience. And it can be done because, I did it, and, the company, survived. I didn't really do anything to mess it up. But I think I remember on the move from Travelex to vendor, having quite an off the record conversation with the existing GC head of legal, going, look, I'm not sure I can actually do this. The job description seemed okay, but actually from interview, it's a much bigger role than the job description really says. I'm not sure I can do it. And what was really kind was that the guy was like, no, you can definitely do this. Otherwise we wouldn't have interviewed you. And all the feedback we've got is really positive. So, if the CEO likes you, then, he's a seasoned businessman. He's not going to take you on if he doesn't think you can do it. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to trust what I'm hearing here and I'll give it a go. And, funnily enough, I think, yes, okay, I didn't have all the experience of, a 7-year, 10-year PQE lawyer that, you would have normally hired in that kind of role. But you kind of do learn where you have strengths and you bring those strengths to the table, and where you've got weaknesses, you try and learn and you try and plug those gaps. And, I think we were looking to do a listing on AIM. Nobody had done a listing on AIM in the management team. So I was no less qualified than anybody else going through that process. Equally, when we eventually sold the business because the AIM listing didn't go too well, we didn't list in the end because we couldn't get the funding. That was a situation that none of us had been through before. And, I think, yet again, we put so much focus on our PQE. I mean, normal people don't know what PQE stands for yet. When you're a lawyer, that's what defines you, and that's what
means it's critical. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, you get paid a certain amount because of your PQE, or you can go for this job because you've got a certain PQE. And to be honest, you could be a really crap lawyer who's got 20 years experience, or you could be a really great lawyer with 5, and you could probably do the same net effect on a job. So it definitely should be more about what you can bring to the table. Experience, I think, is really good and really important, but equally, I think it's ability and a certain mindset that I think I hire and I respect in companies that hire in that way.
And how did that feel, being the only lawyer in a leadership team?
I think I just got on with it. I think that's all you can do. I think it's not trying to frighten yourself with you being the lawyer in the room. Yet again, you're a person that's been hired to do a job, and you've been chosen to be at that level. So don't be worried that you're not, and just get on with it. And I think, you are the only lawyer there, so you are bringing a unique set of skills that other people don't have as their focus. One of the things that's really important at that level is to make sure you kind of leverage your network and have a really good group of people around you. And I think that was something I built actually very early on from my days at Travelex, was that networking piece and making sure you've got really good lawyers in the areas that you need them, that you can call upon to help you.
And you've built legal teams on a few occasions. How do you approach doing that, building the right legal team for a business?
For me, it's about really understanding what you need. And I guess you need to understand what you've got before you know what you need. And that's the talent that you've already got, as well as, listening to the business and the business needs, and and kind of forming that opinion and view. So I guess, that's probably the methodology. I think in terms of what I hire, I think I've already hinted that it's more based on mindset, that propensity to just want to do the right thing, that curiosity, that thirst for just trying to appreciate and enjoy what you're doing, because I think those are the people that tend to thrive with me.
And how about people who are prepared to take risks and maybe even, dare I say it, as a lawyer, make mistakes? Is that important to you?
I think it's important that people are able to be honest about what they are and what they've done. And I think, people can make mistakes, that's fine, but, come clean quickly and try and, come up with a way of sort of making it better, and also learn from that mistake. Because if you keep making the same mistakes, then I don't have a lot of respect for that.
One of the things I know you're heavily involved in is the O-Shaped Lawyer program. Could you describe that for me and give a little background about how that program came about?
The guy that founded it is a guy called Dan Kane, who's one of the general counsels at Network Rail. And it was actually based on an internal program that they were running for their legal team. And I think, one of the things that Dan had picked up on was that, some people still had the mindset that they were just here to be kind of great technical lawyers and weren't really engaging more holistically in the business. And so I think what then became almost a kind of behavioural training program for his team has become something a bit wider, because actually one of the things they recognise is that, we're not really trained well as lawyers to kind of focus on these softer skills and behaviours. And there's a lot that's put on, really knowing the law and not getting it wrong. And that's all very well. And I think you do have to be a good technical lawyer, that's by the by. But in order to be a really successful lawyer, and also to make it a more interesting and better profession for everyone, is actually kind of making sure that people are also human as well as lawyers. So, I think it was back in the summer of 2019, Dan and I were at a conference, we were sort of having a bit of a chat, and I think, I think he'd sort of decided then we'll make it more of a movement. So, ultimately, in a corny way, it's to make the legal profession, better place for everybody involved. And, we want to show that, with more of an emphasis on rounded individuals and a rounded approach, the formation of lawyers and legal professionals, ultimately its customers will have a better service, and it will be a more diverse, inclusive and healthier environment. And actually it will keep the profession being, or will project the profession back into a place where it will be seen as something that people want to be part of, and not something that after a few years they want to run away from. So we've been doing a bit of research with the in-house community, general counsel, and we've been looking at sort of private practice firms, law schools, universities, all those sort of different kind of entry points for different kind of interactions with the training and development of lawyers. And we're looking at how we can sort of look at each of those kind of players in the legal kind of ecosystem to say, well, what can you be doing more to make this all those things that we've just described? And so we've kind of got this O-shaped framework that talks about these different qualities that a kind of skill and mindset bases and behaviours that we've done the research on, that we all would sort of recognise that is actually important. And so now it's a case of, well, how do we start to embed this into the world of law, be it at the law school kind of entry level, or be it when you're kind of in private practice and you're interacting with your clients, how should you be behaving to make those interactions more pleasurable, more fun, and ultimately to make it a more sustainable sort of profession.
And are the law firms involved in the program?
Yes, they are actually, and so we're doing a bit of a kind of a pilot with a number of different law firms where certain GCs are kind of piloting this sort of almost this sort of 360-degree feedback kind of process with their firms, and sort of assessing it against sort of a framework of behaviours and skills, so that it's showing how certain interactions, rather than just looking at them in a very black and white sort of way, actually sort of overlaying it with these kind of ideas of these skills, behaviours, practices, and sort of saying, well, could you have done that in a different way? Would you have achieved more out of having an interaction that had a bit more empathy in it?
And are you almost by implication saying to some of these law firms that you know what, some of your behaviours aren't quite where they need to be?
I think so. And I think it's basically saying, look, don't be afraid and give this a go. And it's through like sort of experimentation and collaboration that, hopefully the way that law firms interact with their customers can be reimagined a little, and service delivery can be looked at in a different way.
So if you looked at where you are in the round and your career thus far, in the lens of your desire for justice in the world as your goal at the beginning, how successful do you think you've been thus far?
I mean, probably not as successful as I wanted to be in the traditional view as what I guess driving for justice means. I think I'm pretty proud of the sort of legal leader I've been, whether that's been the way I've managed my teams, the way I mentor people coming into the profession, the way I help colleagues and other professionals at all levels in the profession. And I think for me it's that kind of openness and that willing to share my successes and failures with others in that way to kind of hopefully propel the profession forward and therefore make it a nicer place for us all to be. I guess I'd be pretty proud of myself for that, but it's not quite the way in which I envisaged it. But I think it's almost it's a fight for justice in law, which is is the legal profession giving the right opportunities to the right people? Is it living up to what it should do? And I think the answer is it hasn't been, but if I can help influence that in some way, then I'll feel like there's some success there.
That's a valuable goal. Natalie, look, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thanks ever so much for coming on to the Lawyer's Coach, and we wish you well for the future.
Thank you so much.
That was Oliver Hansard talking to Natalie Salunke, and Oliver joins me now. Oliver, fascinating conversation with Natalie, and you can just sense the passion that she's got for everything that she does. But I just wanted to talk to you a bit about O-shaped lawyer, because that for me is something that, really for me struck a chord. We hear time and time again that being a lawyer is not just about the technical, but really lovely to see a movement that is actually doing something about it, and that's actually waving the flag for those soft skills and those mindsets that really move a lawyer from being just a good technical lawyer to a really great partner.
I think that's right. And I think what really struck me as I was talking to Natalie was the idea that the way in which we have, you and I have been trained, but we're still training lawyers is actually incomplete, because we're not thinking about the softer skills, the behavioural skills, all those important skills that round us as individuals, make us better people, but obviously will make us better lawyers. And a movement like the O-shaped lawyer, I think, is long overdue, and it's really, really exciting to see it in existence and to see how it develops.
And I think what I take away from that, and the thing that has always concerned me, I guess to an extent, is that when you start off on your legal career, the focus is all around the technical. It's all about what you're learning. It's about the law. Lots of things that, I remember that I learned at law school, were long forgotten when you started off in the real world. And, it was almost a rite of passage to be able to start in a firm rather than something that you turned back on and looked at and used. And introducing those soft skills early on has to be right for me, because I think if you put it up there in terms of importance with contract law, with tort, with whatever else it is that you're learning, you have that appreciation for the need to have that skill and you work on it throughout your career. Because I think what tends to happen is you kind of come across those soft skills later on in a career, and some people are open and embrace those, but some people think, well, I've got this far without them. Why should I need them now?
I think that's right. And how do you learn those harder legal skills if you don't have the right behaviours around them? And also, how do you develop the really important things about promotion, which can be, management, leadership, networking, business development, all those sorts of things, without, those core behaviours. So yeah, I think it's a big miss. It's something that I know that some law firms and businesses do work on, but I think it needs to be championed really early on in training and at law school. Absolutely.
and measured, perhaps, because I think maybe that's where sometimes these softer skills fall down. You perhaps have training, but you use the knowledge that you've learned. Great. If you don't, no one really measures you, no one really picks you up. I wonder whether maybe that's something that firms need to think about.
I think that's absolutely right. Tough to do. But yes, if you can start to measure how one behaves in the softer skills just as well as you can in the harder technical skills, then I imagine there'll be greater uptake in that kind of training and development.
Thanks, Oliver. And for those of you that haven't come across O-Shaped Lawyer before, we'd both really encourage you to look into it and to find out what they're about, because it's a really powerful movement, as Oliver has said. And thank you for listening, and we hope you join us for the next episode of Lawyers Coach.
Lawyers Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're enjoying this series, please rate us on your podcast provider so that others can find us. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyers Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyers Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.